Welcome to Conversation, where we take ideas and bring them into life. Today on the program, we can tell that spring is finally coming because our topic today is going to be on running and particularly the marathon. And since that is upon us at this time of year, we're delighted to be talking about that with an author who has written a book about it. I have here at the table Paul Clerici, who is the author of Boston Marathon History by the Mile. Paul was here about a year or so ago. Some of you might have been in the audience at the Morris Institute Library, where he put on a great presentation about the marathon, showing some great slides, which we'll have an opportunity to see a few of those during this hour-long program. And Paul is back in Natick. He joins us. He is a runner, a journalist, and a writer, and has covered the marathon for 30 years and has run it 23 times, so he knows from whence he speaks. And Paul is here. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Great to have you. So much to talk about the marathon with its storied history going back to 1897. Why don't we start at the beginning? Who organized it, and let's talk about how it actually got off the ground, so to speak.
Well, you can thank the BAA and the Olympics. In 1896, the first modern Olympic Games, the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association, had several athletes there, and they did pretty well. And Tom Burke, especially when he came back home to Boston, really liked the marathon distance, which at the time was 25 miles, give or take a little. And they wanted to replicate that here in Boston. So the original idea was to sort of go over Paul Revere's old route, which wasn't the full distance, but they would have added miles here and there. But they just logistically couldn't do it. I mean, if you remember from your school days, the original ride, he went over the Charles River first and then picked up a horse, so you couldn't really do that with a marathon. Yeah. So they followed the train route out west to Ashland because they want to be able to bring officials and spectators and things along the course. So that's how Ashland was found. So for the first 23 years, the first 23 Boston Marathons, starting in 1897, the starting line was actually in Ashland, which is nice because they have like a nice little marathon park there now. It's on Pleasant Street. There's an old mill that made shoes and things like that that had burned down in the 30s, but the area is still there, so it looks kind of nice. You can actually visit the original starting line in Ashland, so it's nice. It's still there. And
so the original course is still, other than the Hopkinton piece, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, the rest of it, except where was the finish line then in those days?
The finish line was called the Irving Oval. It's sort of near where the Boston Public Library is. They're actually not really quite sure where it is, research-wise. But when it first started in Ashland, the first 2 years, it was on that Pleasant Street. And then about 25 miles later, on the Irvington little oval, it was part of the BAA Games. They had their own kind of little series of games, and this closed the ceremonies. And they would finish the last little lap on the track, and that's where it would finish. And then the BAA finally built a clubhouse, which is no longer there, but that was about where one of the far corners of the Boston Public Library is now on Exeter. That's kind of where it was. So then they adjusted the starting line to about maybe just under half a mile behind the original starting line. There's a bridge there that goes over the commuter rail in Ashland. And it was there for about 6 or 7 years. And then the field of runners grew so much that they had to move it again. I mean, it was only maybe, I don't know, a couple of dozen runners, but it grew so much they couldn't have it on the bridge. So they moved it to where the current 4-kilometer mark is of the marathon. So the current Boston Marathoners actually run over around the 4-kilometer mark near the state park, the last of the start lines that was in Ashland. So it was interesting.
Were there less than a dozen runners that were there on the first time in 1897?
There were 18 entrants,
18, okay.
18 entrants that first year.
Yeah.
And the story goes that Tom Burke, who was the BAA man who started this and had won some gold medals at the Olympics, dragged his heel across the dirt road as a starting line, and basically he just said go. They took off down Pleasant Street with some cyclists, riding by next to them. Everyone else went on the train. Train went down to whatever the next checkpoint was, and they waited for them and did that all the way to Boston.
So they had their ready-made crowd as well who followed them in. Huh?
That is true. Yeah, they had people in the town that sort of cheered them on. They may or may not have known what was going on.
Right, like what is this happening here? Yeah.
Yeah, who were they running from?
What are these?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the wear was quite different, obviously, than today in terms of
Yes.
that.
Yes, yeah, they had different, even the shoes.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Johnny Kelly, the elder, once, and he said his first shoes, long-distance shoes, were basically his track shoes, his track flats, that he took the spikes off.
Oh, my goodness.
When back then, well, currently now, too, when you run track, there's really not much to your shoe. And you just have the spikes, for your traction. And that's what they used back then before they even started making things. So, and then at the end of the race, it'd be falling apart.
I would think so.
Yeah.
If not before, maybe. It
I
probably
wouldn't
had
want
quite a
those,
challenge.
no.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did the winners get, if anything, other than satisfaction during those early years? Did they start with the stew part?
You'd get beef stew,
Yeah.
a bowl of beef stew.
Even then, huh?
I think even then they had the beef stew or some sort of a stew like that.
Interesting.
And that became a tradition for the longest time. The laurel wreaths did not start until later, which myself included thought that started from the original, because with the Olympics, that's where the laurel wreath started, or a branch. You have an olive branch that was presented to the gold medalist. But the BA did have like a nice little medal for the longest time, a little diamond in the middle of it. So they did have some medal early on, and trophies. You'll see some of the trophies that BEA has on display. Some actually big, nice-looking trophies, too. It wasn't as organized, obviously, because marathon was just starting. I mean, they had, before Boston, they had one in New York, and that was it. I mean, long distances like that was really in its infancy. So it was just run for the fun of it. It really was, and the enjoyment of having that kind of accomplishment.
Looking into the early 20th century and even up to the middle, in terms of things like World War I, World War II, the Depression, things of that sort, did the race continue during all of that? And it must have had quite a different look given those years of particularly the wars.
Yeah, the World War I, 1918, had a relay, actually. The marathon's been held every year, technically, except 1918. Where it wasn't a marathon, they had Army relays. Camp Devens actually won it. So they had relay teams from different institutions, like Camp Devens actually won it. So in 1918, it was a relay. That was the only time. It was never canceled. It was close to being canceled, nothing to do with the wars, with the huge rainstorm we had probably 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. It was really torrential, really bad up until that morning.
Right. Yep.
That was the only time that I can think of offhand that was just close to being canceled. Other than that, and they've had some bad weather over the years too.
Right. In 1918, was that more almost of a training type of event than a marathon from an athletic standpoint, that they had the relays?
They could have done that. It's interesting, because it was a relay, you're not running, no individual ran the full distance, so
Right.
it could have been part of that. I think there was only 6 or 8 teams. It was not that many. It was good to continue it, to have the race continue. But yeah, because a lot of the athletes, any marathon athletes just like Ted Williams with the Red Sox, during a war,
Yep.
doesn't matter who you are. So same thing with marathons. You have top marathoners going to war. So yeah, they could have used it as part of staying in fit training because of the distances were so short for each runner.
And of course, World War II must have had a similar kind of thing. Maybe Korea and some of Vietnam, you could, I guess, go up through the years in terms of the folks, but particularly World War II, again, having disrupted so many lives.
Yeah, they continue. See, but by then, it's more of a rallying thing, whereas 1918, it suffered because top runners were being, in the war. World War II, a lot of things that happened in World War II, they used it more as like a rallying thing, as more of the top runners are obviously in the war, but let's not have it. Let's have the marathon, either at the very least to get your mind off the war, but also you can maybe sell some bonds or keep promoting American life and like that. So you kind of went through it a little differently for that.
Right, more of a symbolic nature in that respect, too.
And in the latter wars, you will see troops running the Boston Marathon and other marathons in uniform, to bring more awareness. So it kind of turned a little bit to, let's increase that awareness, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. Getting back to the weather for a second, so the only time, amazingly enough, even the blizzard of '78 and some other weather events around that time didn't really stop or consider impinging on the race.
Well, they've actually had, and knock on wood, they've had snow during the marathon, sleet, heavy mist enough that the helicopters couldn't fly, which interrupted television coverage because the radar couldn't bounce off the helicopters to show the coverage from the cameras.
Yeah.
So that was thick. That rainstorm I mentioned from 2007 was so bad. I mean, I remember Dave McGilvey was saying, the race director, that rarely will there is a cutoff point when you cancel an event like this, and it's not the day before, it's like 2 weeks before. But he kept thinking based on weather, but the weather was so, I remember just rivers going down the starting line, because I ran that year, and just, it was over the curb. It did subside a little bit during the course, during the race, but he woke up that morning and that was close, he said, because public safety is what he really bases everything on. Yeah. And 2012 was the heat. They didn't cancel it, but 2012, the BAA did an unprecedented announcement. That was the year that they said, for all you official runners, you can defer till 2013. Right. It's going to be so hot. We know this now. It's going to be so hot throughout the entire race, start to finish. You can defer if you want to 2013, which I ran that one, and I was joking with my cousin. He deferred. He was, he runs to qualify, so he's a very good runner. And he told me, I'm going to defer, I'm going to do it next year. And I sort of made fun of him. And I ran the race, and it took like almost 7 hours. They extended the amount of time. I mean, it was just so that bad. Right. So I contacted him later on. I go, all right, you're the smart one. I shouldn't. Like, it's like I'm still being affected by that. But
and that was your last race, right? Due to writing the book and some other things.
Yes, because then I wrote a book on the Greater Boston Track Club, and the deadline was very close to the following year's marathon. So
right.
Yeah.
And of course, that was the infamous 2013 with the bombing and so forth, which is another. Let's talk about some names. Who was one of the first household names? Would it be somebody like Clarence DeMar? And of course, then came Johnny Kelly, who the elder and all. I mean, so the names have been associated with it for so many years.
Yeah.
How did that start? Any particular? Was it repeating, winning for a number of years that got them into that?
Yeah, a little bit of both. In 1911, Clarence DeMar won his first one, and he was a local guy, and everybody knew him. And the story with him is that the doctor said he had like a bad heart, so they advised him not to run, and he won it in 1911. So that was early. That was 14 years into it, 14, 15 years into it.
Right.
So he didn't run, I think, for 8, 9, 10 years. And then he started running again. He ended up winning 6 more. So he became very well known, first because he was local and he was a very good runner, from Melrose, Mass. But then he won all those races. And during the Depression era, so people had someone to look up to, and one of us. I mean, he worked, blue collar jobs, so you can identify with somebody like him. So I think he was probably one of the first ones, and then obviously Johnny Kelly, the elder, he won 1935, so he won pretty close to Clarence DeMar, and everyone liked him. 2-time Olympian, he came in second place 7 times, and he worked another blue collar job, but back then you'd have like celebrities where they were paid to run. So
right, exactly.
They were one of us. Mm-hmm. Here's a guy, he does the Olympics, and he comes back and he's working at the print shop, and you just saw him, and they didn't become
corporate
prima donnas or
sponsors,
whatever.
none of
Not
those.
that they do
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
but they didn't. They stayed. Like one of us, which was nice. Running does that a lot. I think in a lot of the sports, even not today. I mean, you can walk up to Bill Rogers or Meb Keflezighi, who just won it last year. You can basically walk up to them on a sidewalk and chat.
Yeah.
You can even ask them, and 9 times out of 10, you're nowhere near their talent level. And, hey, I run this and I do this on the hill. What do you think? And they'll tell you. Nothing against Michael Jordan or someone, big famous person, but you got to be able to do that.
Well, do they have agents and publicists and all of these kinds of intermediaries?
A lot of runners do, but either they're not with them, like Meb Keflezighi, it's his brother. Bill Rogers, it's his brother.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing, and they're equally as nice, too. Or if, like, Meb is walking around, his brother will sort of, take a step back and let the person talk to him, as opposed to, you're right, like an entourage, where they'll say, no, go away.
Yeah.
With other sports or celebrities or something. So they are more approachable. And even the coaches, you can talk to them, too. And the coaches are famous. Like Alberto Salazar, the coach for a lot of runners now. You can talk to him. So it's an interesting dynamic. And that's why I think the appeal of running is that, your average runner can go up to a major elite athlete and, in a manner of speaking, have a level playing ground of what to talk about. Obviously, you can both do the same workout at extremely different levels, but you're all going over the same 26 miles.
Is some of it running being kind of solitary? Sure, there are team aspects of it, there are different, connections, but you're really doing a lot of this on your own. So in a way, are you more approachable than if you're a baseball player or someone who's on a football team, and therefore, there's just so many other mechanics and so many other things. And what is it that you need to run? Theoretically, do you need that much to be able to get out on a course and start to build up your endurance?
Yeah, right. There's your. I can understand that guy. I can associate with that guy.
Right,
Because
exactly.
that's how it is. It's like all you need is your shorts and your shoes, and again, you're basically doing the same thing at a different level, but you're basically doing the same thing. You're going over the same course.
Yeah.
Again, the example a lot of people use is you play basketball, but you're never going to play at the Garden, or you're not going to play hockey on the same rink, but you can run. Patriots Day morning. 20-something thousand runners are going to run over the same pavement that the winners are, that the famous people are. So it's an interesting, and you're approachable. I remember Frank Shorter's walking around Hopkinton. I think he was commentating for Channel 5, and he was mic'd. He had a microphone, so he was going to run the race.
Yeah.
And he's walking around Hopkinton and with like a gray sweat top and regular running pants. And if you didn't know who he was, here he is, a 2-time Olympic medalist, a gold medalist in '72. And he's walking around with everyone else in the center of and if you did notice and you walked up and talked to him, he'd say, "Hey, how's it going? How do you like the hills?" "Oh, I don't like the hills." And you're talking to him like it's a guy from Colorado who's running the race. "Oh, by the way, here's a 2-time medalist from Colorado who's running." So it's an interesting. There's your parody of you can talk to him.
And yet, when you're out on the course as a runner, and how much bantering is there back and forth, or interaction, or different things? So, in a sense, you're all one community.
You really are. If you run alone, like you don't run with a buddy or something, after a while, especially in a marathon, the longer distance, you'll just start to notice the people around you run the same pace. You sort of get into the same pace, and you start talking to people. I'll talk to people from out of state. The elites, sometimes they'll say, "Why don't you take the lead now? I'll take the lead." They'll sort of alternate. One of the funny stories Dick Beardsley always said in a duel in the Sun from 1982, Alberto Salazar and Dick Beardsley were basically just shoulder to shoulder for the last half of the marathon. And Alberto Salazar is from Wayland, Massachusetts. So he was running, and Dick Beardsley was from Minnesota. So Salazar was running, and people were cheering him on. And Al sort of looked at Dick Beardsley and said, "Here's my people," and he starts waving at his friends. But a mile later, Dick Beardsley, when people were cheering on Salazar, Dick Beardsley started waving at them, going, "Look, there's my guys." And Al goes, No, they're my fans. Don't wave at my." So you get this little. They're competing.
Yeah.
They're gonna. One of them wants to. They all both want to win. One's going to win. But within that dynamic, they're having fun. They're enjoying it. They're not joking around all the time, but they got these little things like that, and you test each other. But you're right. it's a solitary event. However, you're within thousands of other. It's you're alone, but you're not.
Or when you're running in the pack and you see them go by, and the lead runners, and some of them are in a pack, and there may be one or two out front or something. Is that a strategy? Is it something where the guys in the pack kind of say, hey, my time is later, not now? The ones that are out front, are they kind of breaking the wind for the rest? I mean, is there something going on
No,
there?
it's interesting. There's so much strategy involved. It doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
And that's why when you watch it on TV, hopefully you get a good commentator who can say, keep an eye on that person.
Right.
You're right. You'll have a few runners who go out. Like I remember Joan Benoit Samuelson in the 1984 Olympics. After about a mile or two, and she was going against Greta Weitz, Ingrid Christensen, Rosa Motor, top international athletes. And she went out, I think after about 2 or 3 miles, she was on her own. Everyone was behind her. Well, what they thought was, well, here's this kid from Maine. We'll let her go. She's going to burn herself out. We'll catch up to her, and then the real race will start. Mm-hmm. Joan is looking back, going, where is everybody? How come then, let's go, let's do this. She's running her own race. And they both had their own strategies. And by the time Greta Weitz's group dawned on them, she's not slowing up. They had to sort of catch up. But by that time, Joni was already up, and she ended up winning. Yeah. It's how you play it. If it's a hot day, especially with Boston, with Bill Rogers, with the Greater Boston Track Club guys, Coach Squires taught them, stay within striking distance when you get to the hills. Work them on the hills. Do little surges on the hills. There's enough flat areas between each hill that you can really, really hurt someone who's not used to it, even if they have a lead. And by the time you get to the top hill, you just go. Now that's knowing the course. So like a Bill Rogers may not be in the lead necessarily, but he's going to be within striking distance going, all right, if I'm smart, I'll go here. So you brought up a good point. It's interesting where the packs, there's this whole strategy of how that's done. It's an interesting dynamic when you're watching that too.
Right, I would think so.
Yeah.
Let's, before time really moves along too much on us, why don't we talk a little about the book, Boston Marathon, History by the Mile, and let's go through the miles. You were kind enough to provide us with a photo slide of the communities or what people expect when they're coming along. And of course, again, you did this 23 years yourself and have covered it as a journalist and so forth as well, so you know the course inside and out. Why don't we kind of walk through a little bit of the starting line and go through the high points along the route?
Well, that's what I tried to do with this book. This is the kind of book I kind of wish I had when I first started, because the first couple of years I ran it, people would say, oh, did you see this statue? Or did you see this family that does this? I'm like, oh no, where was that? I missed it. Because you focus, especially when you're first starting running, you're so focused on everything. Right. So over the years I tried to collect some stories everybody knows. But I try to find some little anecdotes. So each town has their own little thing. So if you're a runner, maybe you can keep it in the back of your head, and it gives you something to look forward to in each town. As you're a spectator, it's some neat things to kind of see. Yeah. Like Hopkinton, Hopkinton had several start lines. And when Bobby Gibb, for instance, ran, first woman who ran the entire thing, 1966, she saw, at that time, on Main Street, there's side streets that meet it, and Hayden Row was one of the side streets that's perpendicular to Main. The year she did that, that's where the start line was, on the side street. So when it got onto Main Street is when she jumped in, because at that time, prior to 1972, women were not allowed to run in road races. The AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, did not allow women to run in their sanctioned races, and Boston Marathon was one of them.
Right. Now we skipped over a point. When did it actually move from Ashland back to Hopkinton, and why?
1924 was the first year that it started in Hopkinton, because the 26.2 mile distance was now the standard for a marathon.
Was that based on
That was based on the 1908
trials?
Olympics, King Edward VII. They wanted the marathon at that time was still 25 miles. They wanted to finish in front of the Royal Box, so they added like a mile point.
Mile point two.
Yeah, to the course, so it could finish there. So from that point on, it became 26.2. And I think Frank Shorter always joked something like I think he joked either he wished Phidippides died earlier than the distance that he ran, or the royal lived closer. I forget how he said it. But
Yeah, really.
whenever you get to about 24 miles of the marathon, he always curses and goes, "Oh, wish because now you have another couple."
Yeah, that extra.
Right.
Because it's what 385 yards or something in there
Right.
too. I think so. Every foot makes a difference.
So it adjusted. Primarily, the course is the same. So when the finish line and the starting line would move, the big move was when John Hancock became the title sponsor in 1986. Because the finish line had finished in front of the Prudential Center on Boylston. And John Hancock's like, well, we're going to put X amount of money into this race. We really don't want it to finish in front of one of our competitors.
Right.
So they moved it in front of the Boston Public Library, closer to the Hancock Tower, which then adjusted the start.
Okay.
You know,
So the start then really got adjusted at the other end.
And then there was some in the 50s, one of the big changes was the overpass over the Mass Pike, which is the last mile of the race before Kenmore Square. Nothing to do with the marathon, they redid that overpass. What happened is they kind of straightened the road out, just city construction. And no one caught that for 3 or 4 years. What happened was they shortened the distance of the course because nobody remeasured it after that construction. So they had to realign again the start. So Hopkinton has a few start lines that they had to readjust. So, but primarily it is the same course, which is nice. Imagine that. It's like,
Interesting, yeah. And it has to be so technical because, again, you wouldn't qualify otherwise, right?
right. So it has to be that.
that.
And I think by now they've probably measured it every year, but it's so structured as to what they want to do. But yeah, you're only in Hopkinton for just under 2 miles. And it's a tough thing. You can really hurt yourself the rest of the race because it's such a quick downhill.
It's downhill.
Right. So you really got to keep an eye on that. But that has there's a Korean athlete little memorial in front of the Korean church. There's a Dick Hoyt statue in front of the school there. There's a starter statue of Brown shooting the gun that family has done for years. Stelio Kirianis on 1 mile mark, who won this in 1947, is a statue of him in Hopkinton. So Hopkinton has a lot of great history. Johnny Kelly Crossing in the Common, there's 2 sidewalks that meet. So it's a nice little
Nice
nod.
venue for
Yeah,
that.
it's a great place to walk around and see all these history in Hopkinton. Yeah, it's nice.
You have the tendency, and in your book, you kind of strategize, or you have it strategized for you, right, in regards to how to run it. And so I imagine that first mile, starting off downhill, you must feel like, oh my goodness, this is going to be great. And do you have the tendency, or do people have the tendency of starting off too fast and then running out of gas?
Every year I did. But yeah, Coach Squires always said
That's right,
that.
Bill, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He knows this course more than anyone. He's the one that in Wellesley, famously when he was training his guys, again, the Bill Rogers, Alberto Salazar's top guys, who were members of the Greater Boston Track Club. In Wellesley, the first hill that goes down toward Newton Wellesley Lower Falls, he was trying to explain to them about cutting the tangent. When you're running a course and there's a turn, you don't go wide like a car. You cut the tangent, get as close to the turn as you can. And the guys didn't get it. They wanted to run in the middle of the road. So he brought the guys on a Sunday morning to where that hill is, a tennis ball. He put the tennis ball on the road and just let it go. He goes, watch that tennis ball. And the tennis ball went where the tangent was. He wanted to put a visual in their head so the runners now understood what to do on the course. So he knows this course so well. He gave me some advice with each chapter. So each chapter in the book is each town. And within each town of each chapter has little anecdotes of that town, how much mileage of that town, but also a couple of little tips from the great Coach Squires of how to run. And in Hopkinton, one little trick he said, which was great in Hopkinton when you start, because you always want to go out fast because it's downhill and you're pumped up and you have all your energy, you're ready to go. You should feel great, obviously. He said, try to go behind somebody who's running just slow enough that you want to go around them, but don't go around them. Let that person sort of force you to go slow. It's tough because you're ready to go. There's Rocky music playing in someone's driveway.
Right, you're really pumped.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, even in Ashland, the first few miles. And he goes, no, you just when you're running, you know your pace, find someone and just stay behind that person for a little while. Let them sort of force you to slow. When you feel you want to go around them, that's the person you pick.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing, but it's a neat little, so I have that in the book too. But it's all these little tricks that, there's a million things to do, but there's all these little ones that if you just keep in your head, and I tried to when I ran it, because I knew him throughout, most of the 23 years that he gave me this advice, and they work. Obviously, they work because they work for the big guys.
Right, it'll work for everybody. So Ashland, then, you get to the town line and into Ashland. Any particular things to look for there?
Well, Ashland had that's where
Where the start line was and so on.
Right, the
Yep.
start line,
Yep.
and it has that's the statue at the 1 mile mark. That's also where Catherine Switzer incident, where when she ran in 1967 with a bib number, and Jock Semple, who was one of the race officials, they were on a press bus in front of where she was, and he was, as they say, the fiery Scot. He was the BEA official, not a race director, because they didn't have those until 1947, and Will Cloney was the race director at that time. And the media kept saying, hey, she wore bib number 261. They kept saying, hey, that 261 guy, he's a cutie, he's pretty good, and they, just needling him. And he saw that, so Will Cloney got off the bus first to try to get to her. And he was slow, according to Jock Semple, who ran out of the bus, the little press bus, and ran toward her to tear the number off. Because again, at that time, the AAU did not allow women. So Jock Semple, who could have handled the situation obviously much, much better, his concern was if she finishes with a number, that could taint and disqualify everybody else. The AAU would disqualify everyone. It's like the taint rule. Here's somebody illegal finishing because she did not have a legal number. She had a man's number.
Right. Yeah.
But he tried to tackle her, and they took those pictures, and that advanced the fact that, come on, guys, the AAU,
Right.
you're a little archaic in your thinking. In the 1972, they finally said, okay, women, obviously they could run before that, but they said, okay, you can run.
Right. So Framingham, you come into Framingham, and what is distinguished there as you come
Well,
along?
Framingham's neat for us locals. Around Framingham, although the time's a little different now, you start seeing scores about the Red Sox game. People put it on little chalkboards or little signs. Out of staters, they may not know what that means, but when we're running, we like to know the score of the game. Framingham's also, which has a great story, 1907, a train actually cut the course in half during the race. There was about 6 or 7 runners in the lead, and they heard the train noise, and they ran a little faster to get over the tracks,
Yep.
and a train cut right behind them. So all the other runners had to wait until the train went through. Meanwhile, these 6 or 7 guys, they're taking off, going, we're going to use this train, like a
Right,
football game. I got a blocker over here. I'm going to go as fast as I can. Now the commuter rail goes parallel to the course, but at that time, the train cut right across.
Cool.
You imagine running a course and seeing, I got to deal with a train too?
Right. And Framingham still has train problems, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So you come through Framingham, and a lot of excitement there, and then you're on to where we are in Natick, and of course the studio here is right at the corner of where the runners come through.
Yes. Well, one of the things, I have a really good picture in the book of in Natick. I remember running up a hill, and I think it's right when we get into Natick, and on the sidewalk is Santa Claus. There's this gentleman who looks just like Santa Claus, wears the red outfit, has an elf next to him, and here we are in April, and it could be like 70 to 80 degrees, and sometimes he'll take the coat off, and he has like Christmas suspenders, and some people have their camera phones. I have a little camera in my fanny pack. And the elf will take a picture of you with the Santa. It's great just seeing Santa. And he says, you've all been very good boys and girls this year. The guy is great. And then there's a gentleman right before the center of town on a flatbed who sings songs, like Neil Diamond songs and stuff. Mm-hmm. You can hear him before you can see him. It's
Anyone you think tempted to jump into Lake Ochitchewit?
I think a lot of people do, maybe this year too. But yeah, the big one was Tarzan Brown in the 30s. I asked Coach Squires about that too, because the story is he ran, and it was so hot because the street was a little different between the two bodies of water. Yep. In the 30s. So it's not as
pronounced
as weird as now. Yeah. And he jumped in the water, swam, went back on the course. And he goes, well, he didn't do that, but he did take his shoes off, got his feet cool, and put the shoes back on and went back on the course. So he did take a little dip. You know how apocryphal some stories get, but that is a neat story. And I know as a runner myself, and this is hysterical, every year I run, I look over and there's always some people on canoes fishing, but their back is always toward us. So it's almost like they just ignore us. They're just fishing, and it's like, 20,000 people running behind them, and they're just fishing on the
It just-
canoe.
yeah, right.
And they're like, what are you doing? You're
It's a normal
spooking
day,
the
yeah.
fish. Yeah, and it's every year, and it's I love seeing it because it's such a New England. It's a great spring,
Great.
to see. I fish too, with my father, and it's neat to see something like that. It's like, like I say in the book, all these things that you can have in your head, like landmarks to look at.
Yep.
Some are live and some aren't. Some are statues and some are people, and that's one of the ones I always enjoy seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a couple people fishing, and it's just to them it's another day, and it's a neat, a normalcy thing.
That's great. And you come through town here in the Common and all, and come up into Wellesley, and of course there is Wellesley College.
Yeah, the women
Yeah.
are great. They've been there since actually the first year. In 1897, there was a Harvard runner, and they wanted to support one of the locals because a lot of runners from New York and stuff. So they've been there since the beginning, 1897, cheering on runners. I think once it was on Easter break because Patriots Day up until 1968, the marathon was run on whatever day of the week Patriots Day was on. Unless it was a Sunday, then it'd be run on a different day. Up until 1968, it's been the third Monday. But so it fell on an Easter break and the women weren't there, the school wasn't there. So other than that, they call it the Scream Tunnel, and I remember up until recently, I remember even when I ran it, I started in 1990, they were on both sides of the runners. So it's like the Tour de France, you would run and they would separate, and the women were on both sides. Now they're just on Munger Hall, a campus side behind a police fencing. But in the old days, they were on both sides. And it's great because you'll see the elite runners. There's a great picture of Ibrahim Hussein, who won this in 1992. And for his third time, and he's running towards the women, and with a big smile, he went like this, put his hands over his ears because they were so loud. And then several years ago, Ryan Hall, one of our great American runners, who actually I think still holds the record of reaching Wellesley the quickest in Boston. He's running by and he goes like this, puts his hand to his ear to listen to him, and goes like this, and they love it. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're, as you say, an elite runner. Here's an elite runner who's going for the money, and he's doing something, I do way back 2 hours back. And so there's your you can,
Right.
associate with these guys. Yeah, but they are great. They don't stop. They don't stop. You
Yeah.
hear it as you approach it, and then as you run by, you hear this din of cheering, and it's just amazing. Yeah.
So next we head further east, and what is the next type of landmark that you note?
Oh, Newton. Newton
Yep.
has everything.
There's everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where do you start on that one? Yeah.
It's like Coach Squire said, Wellesley may have the halfway point in 13.1 miles, but Newton's when it really starts. That's the one of the funny stories I like is the Johnny Kelly statue. That was dedicated, I think it was 91, 92, and it was actually dedicated across the street of Walnut Street. It's that 19-mile mark. It was across Walnut Street facing us, facing the runners as you run. I think within about a month or two of putting the statue there, someone drove off the road and hit it and broke its arm. So they had to take it down, fix it, and they're putting it back. They put it to where it is now on the other side of Walnut Street, about 80 feet in. And I asked the DPW men how they did that, because it's, a huge statue. And they had it on a crane, and they had a lot of bags of ice where they kind of wanted the statue. They lowered the statue on the bags of ice, and they had men at each, people at each corner. And the amount of time it took for that statue to sink down to the ground, they could adjust it, the statue. Once it hit the ground, that's it. It's staying where it is. And the son of one of the leaders who were doing that, the DPW, said he put like $10 underneath, kind of like a little good luck thing, so just as a joke. And he goes, if you ever see the statue on its side, that means I need my $10 back. But then the hills start, Heartbreak Hill with Johnny Kelly, again with Tarzan Brown. And this is a point you said earlier about a race like this, you're running on your own, even though you're amongst a lot of people. Yeah. Tarzan Brown was leading, and he was kind of focused just in a daze, but leading. Johnny Kelly in second ran up, caught Tarzan Brown. Instead of continuing, as you should do when you catch somebody, you keep going, he sort of patted Tarzan, like, hey, nice job, I'll take it from here type thing, which sort of woke up Tarzan Brown, and he just took off and ended up winning. And Jerry Nason, who was writing for the Boston Globe, saw that and said he broke Johnny's heart on that hill, and evolved into Heartbreak Hill.
That's
yeah,
yep.
yeah. And it's like, it's where it is too. It's a tough spot. It's when your body starts to get into your reserves if you've done your pasta loading. So it's a tough spot in addition to, it being a nice hill.
Right, and of course the weather and wind and direction and so many factors
The people are
make
great
it.
though. Yeah, I mean the people know. Like the kids will draw like a little chalk of a heart, like this is it, and you're doing well. I mean they'll draw. I mean it's the support. A couple of times it was really hot. I had to walk up the hill, and they're yelling at you, in a good way. But they're yelling at you. Come on, you can do it. Let's go. A couple more steps. You can. They will pull you without touching you. They will pull you top of the hill, which is the Gaston Hall at Boston College, and then you can kind of use that downhill toward the cemetery, and towards Brighton to kind of get your second wind if you need it. But that area is nice.
Is it harder running downhill than up sometimes?
It can be. I remember Coach Squires saying that it's like when you're pulling yourself up a hill, gravity's pushing you down, so you have less control going down.
Yeah.
You can control your speed going up, so you can use your arms more to kind of pull you up. When you're going down, a lot of runners tend to like pull back, which can give you more injury. You should sort of tilt a little forward and sort of swing your arms a bit and use the momentum. Like say you're driving a car down a hill in neutral, and once the road levels, you put it in gear, you won't even feel a difference. You try to have that kind of approach. So, and that's a good point. And because the hills go up like that, it just works on your legs, and then that's what hurts.
So next, then we come to
Brighton a little bit, like a mile and 10. They count that as Boston, which is kind of in the book. I separate Brighton, Brookline, Boston, just so like if out-of-staters read it, they may not know we consider Brighton a Boston neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I do differentiate it just enough so people know. But yeah, you're only in Brighton for like a mile and 10. That's Cleveland Circle, St. Ignatius Church. Cleveland Circle has a great story of Patty Dillon, who came in twice, 3 years in a row. Each year she lost to a course record. 1979, Joan Benoit beat her. 1980, Jackie Garreau. 1981, she's in the lead. She's doing really well. She's a great runner. And she's going down toward Cleveland Circle. Then you take a left onto Beacon and go right towards the Kenmore Square. And at that time, they didn't have police fencing like they have now. They had police horses to kind of keep the crowd back, and the horses were facing the crowds. Well, right at that little tangent on her left, one of the police horses slipped on the railroad tracks there and sort of backed into the race. She comes running around the corner and smacks right into the hindquarters of the horse, just full force, did not see the horse. She fell back, and there was a few runners that actually picked her up before she hit the ground. Tom Dedarian was one of them, the current graded Boston coach. So they picked her up before she hit the ground, and she was like dazed, and then Alison Rowe from New Zealand just kind of eventually went around her and ended up winning. So it's like each time it's like, really, I can't catch a break? And then wheelchair athletes sometimes get their wheels caught. One year, Jean Driscoll was going around Savage, who was leading, and her wheel got caught in the tracks there, and it flipped her wheel over. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, you okay? Like that. And afterwards she said, no, that's fine. Athletes fall. Athletes do things like that. I tried to go on the inside of her. She did a good move. That's part of the game. So it's it can be a tough corner, especially if it's slick. For runners too, because of the tracks and everything.
Right, exactly. I appreciate you doing recognizing Brighton, because that's where my memories fondest are of the watching the marathon. So Brookline, and then of course into Boston as we come.
Yeah, Brookline's Coolidge Corner, only for 2.25 miles. It's funny. I just did a story about the laurel wreaths that Boston gets. I interviewed Governor Dukakis, who lives in Brookline, and he ran this one year when he was in school. And he said that Kitty Dukakis, before they got married, swears that she gave him a cup of water in that little area of Brookline. He can't remember that, but he goes, well, if she said it, I must have got it. Kitty's always right, they always think of her. And then Brookline gets to, I always joke about this, I have a picture in the book. Every time you enter a town, it has a nice entering Wellesley, entering Natick town sign.
Yep.
There is not one for Boston. And you're only in Boston proper for 1.5 miles. Right before the overpass to the Mass Pike is the Boston town line. And every time I ran, it's all 23 years, I could not find it. I actually have to drive 1 year to take a picture for the book. And there's this little sign that says Boston Line on a street sign. That's it. Unless they've changed it and put a new one, They don't have a big entering Boston sign. So that's one of the things I always tell people when you're running. Look for the sign. It's in the book too. Look, I never found it while I ran. I always wanted to, because by the time I get to that little overpass, I missed it. Because the 25-mile mark is like right on the pike. And then you go into Kenmore Square, and then they paint 1 mile to go. And even if you're hurt, that last mile, you don't even feel it. You know, you want it to go by quickly because you're in pain, but you want to milk it as much as possible. I mean, it's just, when you go under the Mass Ave overpass bridge, the Tommy Leonard Bridge, and you take a right on Hereford, left on Boylston, that last 3 blocks or so on Boylston Street, the people, no matter if you're first or last, and Dave McGilvery is always last because he runs it after everyone else. The cheering, it echoes because the buildings are so close. You have people who have been partying all day. You have bands that are playing. You can see the finish line coming, the blue and yellow. It doesn't get any closer, but then it does. But then you don't want it to. You know, you've changed your whole life for like a year or so to train for this. Your families have changed their lives. You've rescheduled your lunches, your weekends. Your whole life has been culminating, whether you're doing this for the first time or multiple. This is what it is. So when you want to enjoy that last stretch, and it's always great. It just fills you up, and then you finish, and then you're like, okay, I want to sit down.
And so once the corporate angle of this, you mentioned about John Hancock and some of the aspects early on, but when did it become really a corporate winning type of event above and beyond the stew?
1986, actually. The Boston Marathon was really late to the game with that. You had the New York City Marathon in Chicago popping up in the 70s and other marathons that offered money. They got sponsors pretty quickly. And Boston, for a while, and they've acknowledged this, they say, well, the lure of Boston is Boston. We don't need this extra thing of money and prize money. And a lot of races like that. This is 1986. The Cascade runoff from 1981 in Oregon was the first race that that they above the table offered prize money to athletes, and prize money took it because the AAU, you would taint your amateur standing if you took money. I mean, Bill Rogers was great saying things like this. You should pay these athletes like you pay baseball players. They're all professional athletes. Steve Prefontaine, Frank Shorter, they're all saying that. So the BA was a little slow, and then finally in 1986, John Hancock signed on for a multi-year deal, and then you started seeing more signage, you know, along the roads. Water stations started to come up more, a little more organizations, jackets with the names on it. They moved the finish line. It just got a little more, I don't want to say it got a little more professional, got a little more organized, you know, because the BA was good organizing it, but you take that next step.
And then you had bid numbers and organizing and times and other kinds of things for qualifying. I know people still jump in without a number and that kind of thing into the race. But you know, in some ways, has it become so formal?
It's interesting. I always look at, you're right, there are some purists who say a marathon like this shouldn't have any charity runners, shouldn't have anyone who doesn't qualify for age group or elite. And then other people say, no, I should have everybody. I think any kind of marathon like this, you have 2 or 3 races. You have 3 races in one race. You have the top elite, you have the people who are going for age group wins, and you have everyone else who aren't, like when I ran, I never went for an age group. You know, I ran for a charity. I didn't run for a charity. I got a bib number either through work or something like that. So to me, there's enough room to have all 3 races in one race. And to me, that makes it. I mean, you had some of the elite runners like Meb Keflezighi and Ibrahim Hussein again, after they won, they took their shower, they did their press interviews, they did all that kind of thing. They went back to the finish line and cheered on runners. You know, they don't know who they are, but they cheered them on. Johnny Kelly, how many people waited for him to finish?
That's right. They love the sport.
They love the sport. So they realize, it doesn't matter. I'm not, you know, Meb Keflezighi's not competing against me. So you can have all these different races, I think, in Chicago, New York, Boston, which is, I think, the common thought. It's enough for, you know, you're there. You know, you've earned it in whatever aspect you've earned it.
And the wheelchair runners have also added inclusive part to this race. How long has that been? In
1975, Bob Hall, who was a Greater Boston Track Club, He was actually, Bill Squires was a teacher and a coach at Boston State College, and Bob Hall was a student. And one of the things that Coach Squires taught was physical ed and off-field Greater Boston Track Club. Said, I want to run a race. He goes, okay. He goes, I want to run the marathon. He's like, what? That's a long distance. I can do it. So he helped train him. Similar training to he did all the other guys. He goes, one of the big differences was like turns, things about the wheel. And Will Cloney at that time, the race director, they finally convinced him. He goes, all right. He goes, Bob, if you finish under 3 hours, you'll be considered an official finisher with a certificate and everything. And Bob trained with Coach Squires on his own as well, and he finished in 2 hours and 58 minutes in April 1975. One man. And since then, look what's happened to wheelchair. In Falmouth, in Boston, in all these other races, he opened this up. And now you have tremendous athletes in competing. I mean, Boston is unique in that we love it so much, but I know in other marathons they do too. It's such a technical course. Like Chicago's a little more flatter, so it's a speed course. But with the wheelchair athletes in Boston, you could be out of the running as a wheelchair athlete at some point and get back. It's such a technical. You love it. I mean, it's a great course to run like that. And Bob started that in 1975.
Right, exactly. Let's take a look. Why don't you hold up the book and that kind of thing. This has been out for, as we record this, about a year. Did 2013 have any influence on your writing the book at this time, or was that something that was in the planning prior to that?
Well, the book, I had planned on writing this book about 5 or 6 years earlier.
Yeah.
But the 40th anniversary of the Greater Boston Track Club was coming up, so I shifted gears and wrote that. And coincidentally, as I said, the deadline for the Greater Boston book was the week after Boston.
In 2013.
In 2013, right. Because when that occurred, I know a lot of the Greater Boston runners were running Boston. And I talked to one of the gentlemen, and because I saw his time was like less than a minute from the first bomb. And he said he was on Boylston Street, and his wife and daughter were at the 26-mile mark, which is roughly where the second bomb went off at the Forum. And he finished. They always wait from there. He says hi to them. They say hi to them. He goes and crosses the finish line, and they walk down the sidewalk right past Marathon Sports. They go behind the finish, and they meet him at the family meeting area. And less than a minute or two after that is when the bombs went off. So everyone has these remarkable stories of survival.
Yeah.
And when I wrote Boston, I was already writing this again like 4, 5, 6 years ago. I did include the last chapter called Memorial, because there had been other instances where 2 other people have died throughout the history of the marathon. So I wanted to kind of include everybody. And I did talk, it's primarily more about the memorials that started popping up, all the flowers and things. I didn't want to dwell on the actual tragedy. I mentioned it briefly, but I really want, because I took some pictures of the flowers at the Copley Square that they had, at the fencing at Boylston. They're beautiful displays, and immediately, one thing that I marveled at and people ask me about is that when the bombings occurred, you get this vacuum, this darkness of despair that you feel as a human when you watched it.
Yes.
Almost immediately, I'm talking instantly, and I know people realize this, you got support that filled that gap. When they stopped the course, mid-course, and runners were on the course, people near St. Ignatius at BC, the Jesuits and the students opened up St. Ignatius Church at about the 22.5 mile mark. And they like 300 or 400 runners went in there. They brought bagels, orange juice, translators, phone chargers to call. All along the course, people who are watching us on TV live came out of their house with blankets, because you can get chilled after you run. They showed pictures of Kenmore Square, and then when the runners were stopped under the overpass of Mass Ave, people were coming out of those apartments with orange juices and phones and things. That happened so quickly. I think that filled you still had anger, you still had sadness.
Yes.
But boy, that support was so immediate.
Yep.
And long-lasting still. Obviously, it will never stop.
Because
that helped.
Runners don't have, cell phones and all that kind of gear with them.
Well, nowadays a little bit more, but yeah, you're right. Most of them they didn't, and they shut the cell phones off because they were afraid other bombs might be triggered. At the time, they found a third package near a hotel. They didn't know how far that'd be down. Yeah. But you're right. Not everyone has them. I mean, your shorts and your shirt. And if you did have them, you couldn't use them, but you could use landlines and things. So the support was, because they didn't know what to do. What they first did is they just funneled people down to the Common. When you came up underneath the overpass, Comm Ave, while the race was still going on, they let them go down just to go to the Common. Then when they realized what was happening is when they stopped it. Yeah. So you have thousands, I think, I have the stat in here, I think it's like 4,000 or 5,000 runners were still on the course. That's a lot of people to discover what to do instantly. So the neighborhood support throughout the whole course, I'm talking from Wellesley on, really. I don't know, I think everyone was basically through Wellesley. I don't think there's anybody in Natick, really. There could have been some stragglers, but that's amazing, on your own, not organized. People coming out of neighborhoods, and they did this on their own. That's the humanity of helping, spontaneous. That filled I think, I found that amazing.
Absolutely.
The warmth that you saw. And then it continued, obviously.
Right. And people ran toward the incident, not away from, and so forth. I mean, many stories on that.
They didn't think about it. That's what I mean. That filled up any instant of horror so quickly with support. It's amazing.
Paul, you're now working on the Falmouth.
Yes, a similar book will be coming out in July 2015 of the Falmouth Road Race. And it's interesting. It's a lot of parallels to some of these races, too. And a lot of the same, I interviewed a lot of the same runners because people consider Falmouth really up there with a Boston Marathon type. And you have Frank Shorter, who run it, Henry Rono, great runner from the 70s, Bill Rogers, Craig Virgin, some of our greatest runners, really a who's who. Mm-hmm. And then you have Catherine Dureba and Lorna Kiplagat, the Kenyan runners. Mev Kofesky, he hasn't won it, but he's run it. International athletes, Rod Dixon from New Zealand. So it's really like a little microcosm of of a larger marathon, and it's a Cape. You gotta love the Cape.
Yeah, exactly. So you're working on that. You continue to write for various running magazines, and of course promoting this book and your original book as well. So it sounds like you're keeping quite busy.
Yeah, a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I love meeting the runners. It's just amazing. Everyone has stories. Everyone has questions. It's one of those things, as you say. Other than other sports, in addition to other sports.
So accessible.
It's so accessible.
Yeah, really.
And it doesn't matter what the question is, on what level, or story. Someone will tell me a story where they were at the 1990 race or this or that. It's great. It's a part of, it's one of those incomplete histories that you're never gonna know the whole story. And that's what's half the fun, hearing things too.
There are so many different levels, as you said earlier. Where can people find the book?
Right now, the books are at Barnes & Noble's. Independent bookstores, the History Press website, Amazon, and those usual ones as well. But yeah, somebody said to me, finally they got it, and they go, it's like a souvenir. And I didn't think of it like that. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Because I did pick a little bit of everything in here. And I remember 2 years ago in Ashland, I did a little expo there, and somebody bought it on a Saturday, ran on a Sunday, and she said, it was my first Boston I'm doing next month. And I started reading it in the car, and I started crying because I was really getting into it. My stepfather goes, "You crying? You can't even get through the book. You're gonna get through the marathon?" Just to kind of lighten up, and she laughed. But that's what I mean. It's so much to look forward to when you're running it, and you can flip to each chapter, each town. It's a neat thing, yeah.
Absolutely, it very much is. Paul Clerici has been my guest. He is the author, Boston Marathon: History by the Mile, and I hope you have a chance to see it and read it and absorb it, as well as, of course, go out and be a participant or a spectator in the marathon itself. Paul, it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much for all of your stories, and we'll look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Conversation today. We look forward to having you join us next time. Thanks for watching, and stay curious. Bye for now.